So good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm Linda Scott. I'm the Dean from the School of Nursing here at UW-Madison. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the final day of the Women in Wellbeing in Wisconsin in the World Annual Summit. And you know, when I first looked at that, I thought, wow, I could really use the acronym 4W. But I thought, it really seems important on this final day of inspiration to remind us of what the 4Ws stand for. Women, well-being, Wisconsin, and the world. And this struck me as important because I realize how quickly we can become consumed by our individual circumstances and our personal pursuits. Yet, as Maya Angelou reminds us, that to succeed is to find it in our heart to care for one another. And today, each of you have taken the time to consider how you can be a part of something bigger than yourself, how you can care for one another through your thoughts, your actions, and your pursuits. You have each taken the time to consider our world, your place in it, and our opportunity to make a difference. And for these, Wisconsin and our world will be much better. There is also something particularly compelling about the theme of the conference and the message of Thursday's keynote speaker, Women Lead. There is truth in that, because in fact, we do lead. Whether it's from the front, from the side, or from behind, we pave pathways and we transform lives. We transform them often because we ourselves have been transformed. As Rita Gudere has written, I am strong because I've been weak. I am fearless because I have been afraid. I am wise because I have been foolish. We lead because we have ourselves been transformed, and we continue to embrace transformation. As a nurse and as a nurse educator, I am inspired by the concept of transformative education. It seems so natural, and yet I recognize it's not an easy process. In nursing, we assess environments, we consider what we see before us, and make diagnoses that improve situations for those involved. We assess and we respond for the benefit of the whole. Over the past few days, you have made space to do just that, to consider the environment within which we find ourselves and to create new pathways that transforms lives by infusing new perspectives and by considering the power of the feminine perspective. More transformation awaits you today, including a discussion of which I am particularly proud to that it includes one of our researchers from the School of Nursing, Dr. Earlise Ward. She's here to highlight her work on mental health and resilience among African American women. I am confident that she and our colleagues will contribute to a thought-provoking panel discussion and dialogue with you. So welcome to the 4W Summit session this morning. May you continue to open your minds and your heart to our world and to each other. So enjoy the session. Thank you.
Good morning. I must say it is certainly wonderful to see so many of you here today, so I want to thank you in advance for being here. So I'd like to start off by telling you about a story. I call it The Woman on the Bus. This happened to me several years ago, and I won't date myself, but several years ago. As a student, I was on my way to work. I was actually working at Janean Mental Health Center at the time. And I happened to sit next to an African-American woman on the bus. And that was during the time period where, as an African-American on the bus, not too many people sat next to you. So we sat next to each other because we knew how that went. And she started a conversation with me, and she said, "So what are you studying?" And I said, "I'm studying counseling psychology. I'm particularly interested in cultural issues in counseling." And she said, "Well, that's really good because we need more people like you to be studying that stuff." And then she went on and she said, "Girl, let me tell you what happened to me." And if she was standing, I suspect she'd have gotten like this and said, "Girl, let me tell you what happened to me." So she proceeded to tell me. She said, "Sometimes I have mood swings, you know. When the weather gets cold, I sometimes get depressed and unhappy. Part of my unhappiness is being a black woman living in a white city. Anyway, I decided to tell my doctor about the mood swings. He recommended counseling. Anyway, At first, I didn't want to go because you know how us black folks think about counseling. Plus, I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. Right? So I went in. I finally had the courage to go to counseling. I thought it might be helpful. Within the first 30 minutes, the counselor said to me, "I think you need to see a psychiatrist for medication." What's wrong with that damn counselor? He didn't even spend any time trying to get to know me. He immediately started talking about medication. I just needed somebody to talk to. Well, girl, I never went back to see his. Starts with an A. You can complete it. So I, as a PhD student, listened to that story on the bus, and I was just emotionally moved by that story. And I started thinking, how could something like that happen? Why did this happen? We can't allow this to happen. Somebody needs to do something about this. And very shortly, I realized that I started thinking about how I was raised and heard my mom saying to me, "To whom much is given, much is required. To whom much is given, much is expected." I was working on a PhD. I was getting a lot. And so as I thought about, well, someone needs to work on this. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't continue to happen. I realized that I needed to be that person. So the work that I share with you today is inspired by that woman on the bus. And I hope it will inspire you as well. So what is mental health? It's successful performance of cognitive functioning, and that includes thinking, processing information, concentration, having relatively stable moods, and engaging in appropriate behaviors. What is mental illness? Well, it's a medical condition. The woman on the bus didn't necessarily perceive it that way because it took her some time before she actually went in, right? So it's a medical condition in which one may show extreme changes in thinking, mood, behavior, and most importantly, you tend to have distress and daily functioning is impacted. So the ability to go to work, the ability to go to school. We have lots of students here. The ability to go to school and perform well academically, family relationships, when those things start going on and they're happening over a specific period of time, there may be indication of a mental illness, a medical condition. So what is mental health? When a person is experiencing signs and symptoms, again, so changes in their thinking, mood, behavior, but not at the intensity of the length of time that would meet the criteria for a mental disorder, but they're still experiencing signs and symptoms, and that's important to pay attention to. So the woman on the bus, what she talked about may have been signs of a mental health problem. Fortunately, her primary care physician was able to refer her, right? So it's sort of a reality check for us here. An estimated 44 million Americans experience a mental disorder in any given year. That is a lot of people, right? Are we in agreement with that? Yes. And it is unacceptable. Now, sadly enough, only 1 in 4 of the people who are affected seek mental health treatment. Again, like the woman on the bus, right? And as we look specifically at African Americans, 7.5 million have been diagnosed with a mental illness. However, double that amount, 15 million are actually affected. Why? Because they're not diagnosed, they haven't been diagnosed, but they have mental health problems that we talked about, or they may be living with loved ones or providing care for family members that may be experiencing a mental health issue, possibly serious mental health issue, including schizophrenia. Some more reality checks for you, specific to depression, because I study depression. So depression affects between 16 and 18 million adults in the U.S. And in any 1 year period, 12 million women may be experiencing depression. And I tell people depression is an equal opportunity illness. Nobody's exempt, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And by 2020, we used to talk about this like it was so grand, 2020, which is in 3 years, right? Depression will be the leading cause of disability worldwide. So with all of this going on, what we're finding, especially among African Americans, is low use of mental health services. 50% of them drop out after the very first session, like that woman, right? She went back, She went, didn't get the care she needed, and she basically said, I didn't go back to see his, you know what. So she dropped out. There are folks who actually go and they have real concerns about the consequences of seeking treatment. So I've had African-American women who've told me that they have had things happen in their household and they're afraid to go to counseling because Child Protective Services can become involved and they can lose their children, right? So real consequences, if you will. And even if inpatient care is recommended, folks actually see that as lockdown. I'm being locked down. I can't get to do the things I need to do because they're putting me in inpatient care. So that's not necessarily seen as positive. It's not seen as, well, you have a severe mental illness and you need treatment and you need treatment immediately. They're not seeing it that way. I need to go back here, sorry. So I have this slide here. It's an interesting diagram, and I will walk you through it just in a little bit of time that I have. This is a study that I did focusing on older African American women, asking them about their beliefs about depression. And this is really done to get a better sense of their understanding, if you will. And if you look at the core in the middle, you will see that these women have talked about having depression all of my life. It started in childhood, and it became so normal that they started to see it as normal. So these women are suffering in silence. And if you look to the left, they talked about what they think may have caused it: trauma, poverty, lack of control, feeling disempowered in their lives, if you will. And then if you go over to the right, you'll see low treatment seeking, right? So they're not going in like the woman on the bus. They're not going in, or even when they go and they don't get the treatment that they're expecting, then they just stop. But what are they doing? They are using religious coping. They're praying, they're calling up their pastor, they're calling up their friends at church, and they walk around sometimes with t-shirts that say, "I'm too blessed to be stressed." But we know that that may not necessarily be the case, if you will. And in the midst of all of that, it's surrounded by resilience. And so that too blessed to be stressed is part of the resilience that we see with these African American women that are allowing them to function. But we know that they are experiencing, in some cases, serious mental health issues. So what do? How do we promote mental health among African Americans, if you will? I will tell you in just a moment. I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've designed a culturally specific depression treatment, and it is called Oh Happy Day. And we called it Oh Happy Day, again, because of the stigma associated with mental illness. We didn't want to have the name depression in the treatment because it would turn people off. So Oh Happy Day is a group counseling treatment. It is offered over a 12-week period. It is delivered by 2 African American therapists, and folks told us that they wanted it to be group. They said because dealing with these issues in a group will help to normalize it. And they said, I don't want to be the only one who's crazy. It's nice to know that there are other people who are crazy. And so being in a group helps to sort of normalize it, but they're able to support and encourage each other. So I developed Oh Happy Day, a 12-week group counseling treatment. We found very positive results with Oh Happy Day. So if you look to the left, it would be to your left, the first graph. These women at baseline, they showed symptoms of depression, diagnosable depression in the moderate range of depression. Within 6 weeks of treatment, they went down to mild. That was amazing, within 6 weeks of treatment. And then when we ended, we saw a little bit of a fluke. They went up a little bit, and when we talked with them, they were anxious about the fact that treatment was actually ending. But we followed up with them 3 months later and found that they continued to evidence improvement in their depression. The next chart you will see, the blue are women, again, drastic reduction in symptoms of depression, and that continued. So Oh Happy Day seems to be an effective treatment to reduce symptoms of depression in African American women, and it is helping them cope. So that is what I'm doing to promote mental health, if you will. The next step in terms of my work to promote mental health, I'm going to develop an intervention called FAITH. FAITH stands for Fellowship and Improves Thine Health. And I will read this quote to help you understand why that is the next logical step in my research. An African-American woman said to me, depression got me to the point where I tried to commit suicide. And when they got me to the hospital, there was nothing they could do. The doctor said either she lives or she dies. And God let me live, and I said, well, it wasn't for me to die. I might as well pick up the pieces and just keep right on living. I haven't been to the hospital since. I get depressed, but it's easier for me now to get over it because I know how to pray, and I know that God will bring me through it. So my next study will focus on developing a faith-based depression treatment so that we can help women with this kind of experience. And I know my time is getting close to being up, and so I will leave with challenging you. My question is, how can you promote mental health? Well, I'm so glad you asked me that question. Because what I would encourage you to do is to encourage people that you know, your loved ones, friends, family, classmates, who may come to you and they start telling you about some of the struggles that they're experiencing, that you encourage them to get professional help. You can't just kind of, oh, I'll get over it, she'll get over it. It is important to get professional help. And then there are people who are religious. It's important that they continue to pray. You want to encourage them to continue to pray, but be sure to get professional help. Prayers and spiritual care can coexist. And as I turn things over to Dr. Janean Dilworth-Bart, who will be focusing on resilience, I leave you with this quote from Maya Angelou: "Still I rise, because African American women continue to rise in the midst of." Thank you.
Good morning. Ooh, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Gail Johnson, and first of all, let me thank Dr. Linda Scott for her wonderful introduction, and Earlise Ward, because here's the thing. Dr. Ward told that story about the woman on the bus, and I'm one of the people in the room that has known you since before you were Dr. Ward. So guess what? I've heard the story about the woman on the bus a number of times. So I think now I could probably tell it. But you know what? When I tell it, I'm going to make sure that folks understand that it is your story. Before we have our next speaker, let me just say that this particular plenary session is being sponsored by the African American Health Network of Dane County. And let me ask that our chair, Dr. Eva Vivian from the UW School of Pharmacy, stand up. So you see, part of our overall health and well-being and our resilience is that we have great leadership. Just a little bit about the African American Health Network of Dane County. We have been in existence since 2003. For those of you, and I know Dr. Ward knows her and a couple of other people, for those of you who may not know, one of the founders, as a matter of fact, probably the primary founder, Denise Carty. Denise Carty was here in Madison. She was the minority health officer with the state health department for a number of years. She and I worked together, for years, and it really was like her idea that we needed to do something like this. Denise Carty is now Dr. Denise Carty. She is in Atlanta. And so we owe just a debt of gratitude for her, for the vision. But just to tell you a little bit about some of the things that we have done as an organization here in the community. And no, we are not an organization of, thousands of people, okay? But you know what? Everything starts with a few good minds and a few dedicated and committed people. And that's where we are. So we have had programming last fall. We had programming on the HPV vaccine. We've had programming for the community focusing on Alzheimer's. We are hopefully getting ready to have a program this fall in the community. So one of the things that we're going to do now that you have heard of us, you've met some of the folks who are a part of our organization, our expectation is you're going to go to the internet, because that's what you all do, right? And if you're like my late mother and you didn't go to the internet, she would send her children and grandchildren to the internet. But you're going to go to the internet and you're going to, read a little bit about the African American Health Network of Dane County and keep in touch with us. So again, we thank you for being here with us, and it is a pleasure for us to be the sponsor for today's plenary session. Although I've known Dr. Ward for years, Dr. Janean Igaya, Dilworth-Bart, and I have known each other for just a couple of months, I think, okay? But hopefully, this is the beginning, again, of a great friendship and a great working professional relationship. But Dr. Janean Igaya Dilworth-Bart is an associate professor in the School of Human Ecology, SOHE. And guess what? She's trying to get me to come over there to look at working on a PhD, okay? Just a little secret. Her research focuses on the intersection of children's early development context and neurocognitive development, including how these factors interact to promote children's academic and social competence. She is particularly interested in studying contexts of socioeconomic risk and race ethnicity using an ecological model and the area of neurocognitive development that deals with executive function, including such cognitive functions as attention, planning, problem solving, and decision making. It's all yours. Okay.
Thank you for that introduction. It's when you hear somebody introduce you, you're like, wow, that's me. That's me. So I'm going to tell a story about a group of sisters. Actually, I'm going to focus on one sister, but I need to talk about a couple of others first. First, there's the sassy black woman, right? Then we got the sapphire, also known as Jezebel. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about. Well, that's Nikki. We all know who I'm talking about right there. Then there's this one, the angry black woman.
Oh, yeah, we know her.
We know her, right?
Real good.
We know her. Sometimes we are her. I think I was her a couple of times this week. Today, I'm going to talk about this black woman. This is the strong black woman. See, these are tropes. These are cliches. All of these women. I wonder if they even exist. All of these tropes deny black women the fullness of their humanity, and they're damaging our health. So, hat tip to those of you who remember Karen White from the 90s and Babyface. I am not your superwoman, and I'm going to talk about that today. And as I start, I want to quote Sojourner Truth, who asked the question, ain't I a woman? Well, I am, and I'm a human being. So let's talk about this strong black woman and who she is. A strong woman is the lifeline of her family. She carries with her the power to endure pain, the courage to sacrifice. She has the power to create and nurture life. She is indeed the epitome of love and sacrifice. Wow, that's a lot of pressure. So a dear friend of mine, Angela Rose Black, and her colleague, they actually wrote did an analysis of social media and different magazines and this trope of the strong black woman. It's a damaging trope, and finally we're beginning to realize it. As you've heard from my in my colleague's presentation, 7.5 million African Americans are diagnosed with a mental illness, but up to 15 million are impacted. But this strong black woman trope encourages us to power through. We can do it. So finally, we're pushing back against that. And this pressure to be the epitome of self-sacrifice and to focus on self-care and healing. But there's that stigma that's associated for seeking help. Now, this does not mean that by ridding ourselves of this trope of the strong black woman, it doesn't mean that black women don't epitomize strength. However, when we think about that, rather than strength, these examples really highlight the need for resilience processes, interactions that promote positive outcomes, despite the risks that black women face every day, and the African American community faces every day. Because honestly, y'all, racism is stressful. And so are sexism, homophobia and transphobia, underemployment, lack of health care, hunger, environmental toxins, unsafe neighborhoods. All of these things hurt. We could talk for days on each of these topics. So when we think about resilience, let's not think about resilience as a thing, because then we're just creating another way of saying the strong black woman. Let's think about resilience as a series of processes. It's not like your eye color or your height. Resilience, we're watching the slow-moving natural catastrophe that is the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. I'd like to say that that is aberrant, but it's not. These crises have been going on in communities of color for generations. It is through these acts of collective resilience, some of which you're seeing in Flint right now, that focus specifically on access to material resources like water. We have communities that don't have access to water. Like water, like power and control, cultural traditions, and the social justice. These are components of resilience. And what's happening is that our communities are changing the narrative about black children and families, and also about what the strong black woman is. She's actually not the strong black woman. Engaged, resilient women are at the forefront of many of our social struggles. And yes, these women do it with grace. However, to be truly healthy, these women cannot experience wellness in the isolation of the strong black woman. These women, through supportive families and communities, are not strong black women. These engaged, dedicated women are resilient black women. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Janean Igaya Dilworth-Bart.
It's a lot of names.
Oh, but it's cool, it's fine. No, we had that discussion, it's all right. So, in the spirit of full disclosure, I had an angry black woman moment yesterday at about...
You know the time.
I certainly do. I think it was before 12 noon.
Early.
Okay. All right. But here's what you need to know. In the spirit of resilience and just, thinking about, wait a minute, where my life is, I got over it in 5 minutes. And I said, oh, I can handle this. I know what to do. And this morning before, while I was getting dressed to come here, I said, oh, yes, I'll give this assignment and that assignment. We'll have this done in a couple days. So you see? Okay. All right. Okay. How many of you are glad that today is a bright and sunshiny day? Okay. And how many of you are glad that you don't have to turn your heat up real high when you go home today? Okay. All right. So, Annette Miller is the Director of Emerging Markets and Community Development at Madison Gas and Electric. And that's why I asked you that question, because Annette and I have known each other for over 20 years, okay? And I was telling her this morning, I said, you know what? Even though I don't see her as much as I used to, I said, every time I go to MG&E to pay my high utility bill, I think about you.
However I can get it.
Annette is an absolutely wonderful person, and the truth of the matter is she is doing a lot of absolutely wonderful things in our community. And you talk about resilience and sustainability. I mean, you're really going to enjoy what she's going to have to say. She has served as a member of the boards of the Urban League of Greater Madison and St. Mary's Hospital, and as an aide in the office of the former Madison Mayor, Mayor Dave. You all know Mayor Dave, right? Okay.
Yes.
Annette is currently in graduate school pursuing her master's in social innovation and sustainability leadership, which she will complete this summer. So we're going to have a party. Okay. She brings to this panel a focus on how African Americans, while not always well represented in the traditional environmental movement, have been pooling resources and living, listen to this, sustainably, long before it became a popular academic term and goal. And that is the absolute truth. So the one and only Annette Miller.
Oh, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, so I'm going to turn on my computer. I'm going to try to turn on my computer here. All right, bear with me for a moment. So thank you, Gail, for a wonderful introduction. I think how I want to start, and I'm really glad that I have the honor and privilege to present with these two wonderful women, because they did a really great job of framing up a narrative, especially from a mental health and health perspective, you know, the state of Black women, and our young children as well, you know, our families. And where I want to come from is from the community side, which is where I've been these last 20 years and what I've seen. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is what I consider the growth edge. It's a topic and it's a way of sharing this information that's new, because we haven't thought about it in this way. But it's real, it's authentic, and if you aren't experiencing it personally, if you go out into the community, you can see it happening every day. And what my growth edge premise is that as Black women, you know, we believe ourselves to be, and we've been brought up in this context of being social justice activists, but we haven't been aligned or connected with environmentalism. When the reality is the movements came out of environmentalism, and then they started to fracture and change because of, you know, the complexity and the depth and breadth of the issues depending on whose lens you were looking through. And I think one of the things that happened to Black culture and to the Black experience is that we started owning only a part of who we are, because that seemed to be the most dominant part to focus on. So for myself, you know, not only am I Black, I'm also a woman, I'm also a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm so many things, but I will tell you quite truthfully that I spend most of my time talking about my Blackness. You know, that's what I spend my time talking about. I don't get to talk about my feminist side, I don't get to talk about my motherhood side, I don't get to talk about my sisterhood side, I talk about the Blackness. And that is so one-dimensional of who I really am, in all the things that I bring to the table and that I reveal every day. As Annette Miller. And so I think this to be true in the experience of what I call eco-Black feminism, is that there is an intersectionality that is so deep and so beautiful that my job here today is to give you her story, right? Not his story, her story of how it all fits together. So I want to start out with a couple of quotes. This is from Booker T. Washington. This is out of Up From Slavery, early 1900s. So this is kind of the view from a male lens and a male lens of race. Speaking about the environment, to go with my wife and 3 children on a Sunday afternoon into the woods where we can live for a while near the heart of nature, where no one can disturb or vex us, surrounded by pure air, the trees, the shrubbery, the flowers, and the sweet fragrance that springs from 100 plants, enjoying the chirp of the crickets and the songs of the birds. This is solid rest. I like as often as possible to touch nature, not something that is artificial or an imitation, but the real thing. And then in that same book, he speaks of another way in which, as a black man coming from slavery, how he also sees nature. I was always frightened. The woods were said to be full of soldiers who had deserted the army, and I had been told that the first thing a deserter did to a Negro boy when he found him alone was to cut off his ears. So think about that. On one hand, to love nature, and the other hand, to be afraid of nature. And then John Muir, if many of you know, he has been coined the father of conservation. From his 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf, Athens. This is the most beautiful town I have seen on the journey so far, and the only one in the South that I would like to revisit. The Negroes here have been well trained and are extremely polite. When they come in sight of a white man on the road, off go their hats, even at a distance of 40 or 50 yards, and they walk bareheaded until he is out of sight. There's a lot of depth to that statement, a lot of depth. But I'm just going to stay on the top, because we'd be here all day and all night. And I know this is the last day, not the first day. So what struck me is that he said this is the most beautiful town. So as someone who's on a journey of conservation, he's visiting a place that's already doing it. It isn't, happening, it isn't being built, it isn't being designed, he's experiencing it. And that's his experience. So that's what I mean about, and what was said also earlier, is that we embody environmentalism. We are environmentalism, but it's been coined and couched in social justice. So fast forward, Angela Part. The climate change movement still remains highly homogenous by race and class, and significantly by gender in its leadership. Even in 2009, climate briefings held across the country consistently feature mostly male and all-white casts. Like other pockets of environmental and conservation movements, climate change still suffers from the perception and arguably the reality that it is a movement led by and designed for the interests of white upper middle class. Many people erroneously believe that interest in environmental issues is dependent on race, education, and class. To the contrary, growing numbers of people of color working in the environmental field and public polling demonstrate that reality often differs from conventional assumptions. And so that's what I'm trying to pull out here. So what is the reality? 89% of African Americans really stand on policy around climate change solutions, 89%, while whites are at 78%. So when it comes to policy and making decisions, African Americans are right up there in the front, and this is from Van Jones. So what are we as ecofeminists, what is that narrative that we fight every day? It's been spoken about, what we've been fighting every day, that strong black woman, but we're more than that. We embody more than that. And in fact, when you look at resilient black women, they're doing the work together every day to make change in their neighborhoods, in their schools, in their home, in their church, at work, walking, busing, biking, driving. You never see, it's very rare you see a black woman sitting still. She's always off to somewhere, okay? Off to somewhere to do something, and it's gonna be good, right? So our black women are amazing in every way, but we're struggling against a narrative that's been put on us for a very long time. And that's where the disruption needs to happen. And that's why I talk about what I'm bringing as being the growth edge. We need to change that narrative. We need to change that conversation, because the struggle is real. And we're so much more. We're so much more. So a local activist here in Madison, when Majora Carter was coming into the community, oh my goodness, she said, "We are huge believers in sustainability as a key to the long-term health and wellness of Black women, our families, our neighborhoods, and our communities. How we care for, move, and interact with our environment will determine the quality of our lives and our health for the foreseeable future." And that was by Lisa Payton Kerr from the Black Women's Wellness Day in 2013. A national activist, Tamika Butler, said that environmental justice movement needs a new strategy that dramatically differs from the broader environmental movement. Center the dialogue on racial inequity and discrimination and human rights. Think about indigenous people in the Dakotas protecting their water, to African Americans in Detroit still fighting for clean water, to Latino Americans in southeastern LA fighting toxic sites. People of color and low-income people are often segregated into neighborhoods with few resources and open space, but high levels of pollution and toxic waste. So racism aids to the destruction of our planet. And that's why Black women keep having this narrative, because all that keeps coming out is the Blackness, but not about the destruction of the planet, not about the racism, not about the land, not about the water, etc. And ecofeminism is real, and it shouldn't be minimized, and our impact shouldn't be minimized. And Dorketta E. Taylor in Women of Color argues that the environmental justice movement has the largest amount of Black women in leadership in comparison to other environmental movements. That 49% of 200,000, not yet, 205 people of color that are part of environmental justice groups had women as founders, presidents, or chief contact persons. So Black women are involved with the environmental justice movement because environmental racism often directly affects their homes, their families, and their communities. And that's why you see Black women always on the move, always doing something for their community and for their family, but it's so strongly linked and tied to environmentalism. But because the narrative was designed so long ago, a century ago, we can't see it. We can't see it. I bring this slide up because this is for Black History Month. They listed Black environmentalists you need to know. And of this list, 20 out of 23, 10 of them were women. And I won't go through the names. But what also have a strong legacy here in Madison, Wisconsin, and in Dane County. And honestly, I'm just going to say, this was literally me just doing a brain dump. There are some women in this room who also would fit as local sustainable women too. But as I was dumping this out, I didn't put your name down, but I'm calling you out right now. Because really, we all are a part of this. And so there are many beautiful women in this community who are doing it every day. And so when we talk about environmentalism, African American women, Black women, and we talk about activists and we talk about feminists, it's complicated. It's between the narrative woman, Black, community. It's complicated. There's a lot of intersectionality, and we have such a narrow band in which we work to do the work. But what's really important is we need to disrupt our thinking, and we need to change the narrative. And our charge really is, in my opinion, is rather than being on environmentalism or activism, it really should be on well-being. Because when you talk about well-being, you're talking about everything. You're talking about life. You're talking about living. You're talking about thriving, not just surviving. And we all care. We all care about our health, our family, our life, and our community. So let's change the narrative. Let's disrupt the view. I know I'm on red, but I'm just powering through here. I'm almost done. We're not just a part of the movement. We are in the center of it. We need to own it, and we need to claim it. And we can't do it by ourselves. We need all of our allies who believe this to be true as well. And the analogy I want to use is balloons. Because balloons are lifted with air, and they have a string at the end. And there's someone at the end or something at the end holding it. But the importance is that none of these balloons are better than the others. What we have to do is we have to take all those strings and we have to weave them together, because it's a collected story. And in a collected story, it has lots of lift, lots of power, and it will fly high. And so we are eco-feminists. We need to claim it, we need to own it, and we are intersectional. So thank you.
Thank you, Annette. See, I told you, you would want to hear what she had to say. We do have a few moments for questions and comments of our panel. And I hope that one of the things that you realize is what you have here is you have representation from the university, representation from a utility kind of community kind of thing. Right. And then yours truly, I'm from the State Health Department. So you see, when we start talking about, working together and how we're all, and as Annette said, we're always on the move. Yeah, it's true. It's true. So if we have any questions or comments up for the panel, please stand up, and if you got a question. Okay. Okay, one of the things that I'd like to do is, because as I said, I've heard Dr. Ward talk about the story about the woman on the bus. Can you just in a couple of words kind of tell us about the next phase of the research that you're going to do? Because you mentioned that you're going to do something focusing on. Sure.
Thank you for that question. So the next phase of the research will focus on developing a faith-based depression treatment. I read that quote telling you about this woman who attempted suicide and ended up in the hospital and survived, but she talked about how God saved her, and she really focused on her religious belief and the fact that she's been using religious coping, and so since then she has not been struggling as much with depression because she now knows how to pray. Well, not only from that research, but I have additional research that really speaks to the fact that African American women are using religious coping, and as it relates to mental health issues, they're more open to using religious coping versus going in to see a mental health provider. And so as we think about providing culturally competent or culturally sensitive care, we have to meet people where they are. And if where you are is at the church and you're praying and you're sort of seeking fellowship from the faith-based, we have to think about how do we connect with that community to inform interventions and possibly deliver the interventions in those settings so that we can provide care as needed. So that is what I'm seeing in my research, and as I look at that work nationally in terms of research literature, I am seeing consistency for the need for faith-based depression treatment. So that is the next phase of my research. Thank you for that question.
And I see we have, a couple of questions. And we have, microphone. And we have a,
Hi, thank you. I had a question for Dr. Ward. I was curious about your Oh Happiness study. Do you have any follow-up data past 3 months to see about recurrent depression?
Great question. We are actually finishing up a randomized controlled trial at this time, even as we speak. And so in about 2 months or so, we will be analyzing that data, and we will have data looking at individuals across the timeline of the intervention, which is 3 months, but we do long-term follow-up 6 months post-treatment, 9 months post-treatment, and 1 year post-treatment. So we will have that data. So I will say keep an eye out because it will be published. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Ward, perhaps you, as well as other members of the panel, could address this. I agree that too often African American women don't go to seek help. But I question the number that don't seek help, because the patients at Access Community Health Center frequently tell me that they have tried to seek help, but they feel that the providers who they attempt to seek help from don't understand their particular situation. They feel judged and uncomfortable. So while I agree that we should focus on the women that need help, we also need to look at our healthcare system and the type of care that we're delivering to these women.
Yeah. I'll take that, I think. I'll take a stab at it. Thanks for the question, too. So, if I were to go back to the themes, these tropes, these cliches that we use about Black women, we use them within the community, but the community, the wider community, but the community also uses them on us. And so if I go in for help, am I angry? Am I over-sexualized? Am I too sassy in my expression? And so just as we are victimized by these tropes, people use those tropes, in and of themselves, people use those tropes to victimize us. And it comes through in not seeking help and not being able to get it. And I know many of the Black women in the room can relate to being told, oh, well, you just misunderstood what they said. And you didn't misunderstand.
Right.
But there's no space to say that. There's no space to have that validated. And so we are in a situation where most of our healthcare providers are of a different racial and cultural background. And so it's a distinct training need, because along with that, when the training does occur, there are situations where, unfortunately, the training, there's another stereotype out there of the poor, uneducated, unknowledgeable Black woman. And so that experience is dehumanizing. And that's what we're reflecting on. I go and ask for help, but I'm treated like, they don't know me. I go in, and the first thing I'm asked is whether or not whether or not my spouse is hitting me, whether I'm married, do I have, so all of these things. And there are a variety of experiences that all women have, and I'm not diminishing them, the wide range of women's experiences. However, at the same time, I believe, and I don't know if the panel can discuss this too, that these tropes, these stereotypes don't allow us to be viewed in healthcare settings as fully human. And that might be some of the reflection that these women are providing.
I'd like to jump in from a community perspective, and also I should tell you that my mother was a nurse, and so I'm half white and I'm half Black, so my mother was white, German immigrant in the healthcare system in Minneapolis, and I remember her telling me many stories, and this is the other layer of complexity in this conversation, is what's happening in the medical field. So there has been male privilege in the medical field. There's the doctors, and then there's the nurses, and there's a hierarchy. And so, and our healthcare system has been extremely compromised and disrupted. And so when you're talking about racism and you're talking about a medical construct that has a gender hierarchy in there, that complicates that conversation. And so not only are you being dismissed as a person of color, you might also be dismissed as a woman. And then also as a doctor, doctors know best. There's been that feeling that they have all the answers. So when you come in as a consumer, you're looking for that doctor or that medical place and space to tell you what's wrong because you don't know what's wrong. And so when you're coming in because you've been told as a consumer that you don't know, then that further adds another layer of complexity to that conversation because you're expecting that they're going to tell you, but in reality, we're all sort of searching together, trying to understand. It's all through questions on all sides where we get to the discovery of what's wrong, right? So.
Just to sort of add to this, we also need to think about diversifying the workforce, certainly. We also need to think about how we are training our healthcare providers. In our School of Nursing, that is a major focus. We are constantly thinking about how do we diversify the nursing workforce. Our dean in the School of Nursing has been actively involved in an admissions process called holistic admissions. And holistic admissions, you're focusing on all of the different aspects of these students, the complexity, if you will, as my colleague Annette mentioned. And in looking at the complexity of the applicants, we're able to make more informed decisions to really focus on diversifying our student population, which will then result in diversifying the nursing workforce. And as we diversify the nursing workforce, we have a better chance of providing more culturally competent care to our patients. And so to go back to the original question of why there are people who are not seeking services, as we begin to diversify the workforce and make sure that they are providing culturally competent care, we will begin to see more people hopefully using and accessing these services. And as they receive high quality care, they talk to folks. We talk to people, right? I'm not going back, he did this, whatever. But when we get good service, we talk about that as well. And so we then be able to spread the word. The folks who go in are able to spread the word to say, I went to such and such clinic and I got really good care, and you should check that out. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Are we there yet? We're certainly not there, but we are moving in the right direction.
I think Annette has something.
I think the only thing I also want to add is that, I'm looking in this room and we have lots of allies in this room. And I think the other thing that we need to also understand is that we all need to be culturally relevant, all different kinds of ways, because we are really, we call it below the iceberg. So even in your whiteness, you have a culture. And if you acknowledge that culture, then you have to understand that you have to ask questions not only about your own culture, but about the cultures around you. And so I really encourage all of us to really dig deep and think about that, because it's important.
Well, thank you to the panel for what you've done so far. Actually, you have answered the question that I want to ask or the comment that I want to make, but I'm going to go ahead and say what I would like to say anyway. That I think that as Black women and Black girls, we face the systemic gatekeeping system, systemic gatekeeping system. And I think, the need for training is really critical, because I'm thinking, for example, of women who need to seek help in a situation of crisis, where, we're dealing with a crisis, but the person at the other end is more hung up on, have you been beaten up? Or are you being hysterical for whatever reason, when it's a life-threatening situation? And also too, that, who is going to be in charge of training or retraining those who are already in the fields? Because when we're talking about culture, and our girls, our children, even boys, get pigeonholed, because we are educating them to be critical, to be active, to participate in community development. But when they get to the level where they're seeking to enter these fields, especially in science, what is said in many ways, much of which subtle, is that they have spent too much time working in the Black community, the African American community. So how do we get beyond that? To help the gatekeepers understand that, as Annette was saying, these kids, for example, they are like every other kid who went to school, to West High School or East High School or Memorial High School. They learned all the Common Core stuff. And actually, they have an edge. They have a plus. They know what is going on in the community. They've actually been bringing science, for example, to the minority communities in the local areas, yet they're told they don't measure up. So I think that there's really, we reach that space where we're not present when decisions are made. And my question to you is, how do we make sure that that message seeps in? Thank you.
Well, because I always love to jump in with both feet, have an answer for something. Well, really, it starts with all of us. So a lot of what I do, my daily job is really about community engagement. It's about engagement. It's about inclusion. And in fact, my purpose statement is creating inclusion every day with intention. That's what I do every day. And I will gift that to you. You can make it your own purpose, but that's really what it's about. When you're in a room and you see only one way in which a conversation is happening, you need to ask questions, right? You need to ask questions, whether it's all men, all women, all one language, all one, gender identity, all one. If you don't see diversity in the room in the many, many ways in which it can be reflected, mental health, education, income, etc., you have a job to do. You have got to ask the question, why not? What structural barriers are in the way, or as a human, what am I doing to be complicit in not making this happen? And start pushing back, because I'm gonna tell you right now, these young folks, they have inspired me. I listened to a 14-year-old yesterday, a Johnny Carr, just speak it. And he really just reminded me that we really do have power, but we spend so much time giving it up, right? We give it up. So take it back. You have a voice. You see things, you hear things, you know things. So say something, do something, and be the change that you want to see, that you know should be there. So that's where I'm at on it.
2 questions in the front. Oh, 1 in the back and then 2 in the front.
So my question is, how do we address fear of information? Because I feel like in the African American community, the information is there, but the fear is just as elevated. And I say that in terms of not just education, but also dealing with wellness and dealing with mental health, and especially when even maternal health, prenatal is important. That 9-month process is important. I say that because I advocate for women in maternal health, and the information that comes across the board, it may seem, especially if you hear it from friends, but when you're in that room with the doctor and they're giving you information that you may not understand, and it's just like a one-liner, this is what's going on with you, go research it. It's not, that fear is already incarcerated you, and the information is still there. So how do we mediate the fear of information?
May I? All right, so I'm going to think out loud a little bit, and going back to this idea of the collective and collective processes and collective resilience. One of the things that I fear that we've lost in communities is reliance on one another. And, I'm of the frame of mind that no woman should go to a prenatal visit by herself. That she needs somebody there with her, because growing a baby, it's happening in her body, but it's a community event. And so that fear is going to be there, those barriers are going to be there, and we know that there's this astounding levels of infant mortality in the African American community, tragic levels. And so I think that you're right, that fear is there, there's stress, because racism is stressful, and pregnancy is stressful, or it can be, and all of those things come together. So I do recognize that there are those barriers there, and the way to, in my perception, to deal with them, to cross them, is by having Big Mama go with you. Does everybody know who Big Mama is? Okay. So have Big Mama. Have your village go with you. And there are some structural issues there because, and it is very needed. We have HIPAA rules now. And so we have all these rules around privacy that are important and they're necessary, but they might not reflect cultural needs and norms. And so we have to find a balance there. And so I will turn it over to the expert.
Well, I will talk specifically about mental illness in the African American community. So there is a stigma associated with mental illness. And because of the stigma, we then see the fear of information. So people are not trying to get information, they're not listening, and they'll say, well, I'm not crazy. I don't want anyone to think I'm crazy. And so with that sort of false perception of mental illness, if you will, they sort of put on blinders, if you will. They're not paying attention to any information related to mental illness because that would simply provide evidence that you might be experiencing a mental illness. So first we have to really think about the issue of stigma. We have to think about how do we get rid of that stigma. Our former Surgeon General, David Satcher, coined the term, which was actually the title of my talk. There is no health without mental health. So we have to help people to recognize that your mental health really is priority. Without your mental health, what do you have? So you've been diagnosed with cancer, but you're clinically depressed. How do you even get yourself up to go to the doctor to get radiation therapy daily? Because when you have cancer, you may have to go to radiation therapy daily for the next 30 days or so, right? If you have diabetes, you have to manage your diabetes. If you're clinically depressed and you're not really motivated, you don't have enough energy, how are you engaging in the right type of self-care to better manage your diabetes? So because of the stigma associated with mental illness, we really have to start there. We really have to start by getting people to be more open-minded to thinking about the fact that a mental illness is not any different from, say, having cancer, diabetes, or hypertension. And why is it that it's not any different? Because untreated, if your cancer is untreated, you don't get radiation or chemotherapy, you can die. If the depression goes untreated, one can die as well. Why? Because one may commit suicide. Robin Williams, you all know of Robin Williams who died. He committed suicide. Robin Williams was clinically depressed, okay? So the same way untreated cancer, diabetes, or hypertension can lead to death, the same way untreated mental illnesses can lead to death. And so the idea is to really talk to people about it from that context, to help them recognize it's not any different from other types of mental illnesses, right? So that's one way to begin to relieve the fear, that it's not any different from other chronic types of health conditions. And provide love and support. So if you recognize that a family member or a loved one, a classmate, someone that you're close to may be struggling, encourage that person to seek help. And what do? You say, I will go with you. I'm willing to drive you. I'm willing to take the bus with you. I'm happy to sit in the lobby and wait for you. If you would like for me to come into the session, I certainly can do that as well. So offer real support. Don't just talk, not just lip service, but offer real support and go with people. Go all the way with folks to really provide them with that support. And as you do that, they're more likely to listen to information, right? Because as they're getting better, they're more open to listening to that information. The fear is being reduced, and hopefully it will eventually go away. And as they learn to others, why? Because it takes a village. So as one person learns, they pass it on to the other person. They pass it on. So in terms of the information and the fear, it's about how we talk to people and how we provide support.
We have time for just one more question.
Can I be it? Can I be it?
Okay, okay. And then,
Two people who've been waiting.
okay. Okay. And then, because I think, is there a session after this one in this room?
There's a 15-minute gap.
Okay, so the two people who've been waiting, we'll take this question, and then the two folks who've been waiting, we'll take your questions as well. And then we do have to wrap up.
Thank you so much. I'll try to make my question really quick. I sat in a lecture from Angela Davis just a couple weeks back in Milwaukee, Marquette University, and she was talking about how we spend a lot of time a lot of energy diversifying workforces and structures that are rooted in just sourness. And so how we are, we need to start building our own structures from the ground up. And so I hold that along with a tendency for me to see us get split up into good collaborators and bad resistors. And so I'm wondering if you all could just say a little bit about that, and if you have any feedback about those two things as I move forward in my work in trying to end oppression in all its forms.
So so I think about that quite a bit. I've been thinking about it really recently too, and so I'm a great collaborator, and I'm learning how to be a resistor. And it is difficult. And then there comes a moment where I recognize that my very presence on this stage is an act of resistance. Every day that I show up is an act of resistance. Every day that I stand and say, no, we don't treat someone poorly because of their gender identity, their sexuality, their race, or any of those, all of those things are acts of resistance. And so I also think about it in terms of existing in a system while I change a system. And it is difficult. It's a challenge. And so that's why we have moments like this where I can go to someone, I can talk about this, but now I have this new group of people that I can email one day, say, you know what, y'all, I'm kind of tired. This has been, my boots have been caught in racism today, and my legs are tired. And so I think that that's sort of my immediate response, is that we don't have the option. We can check out every now and then and not have to teach and just say, yeah, that's your stuff. I'm not going to teach you today because I'm not there with you. But really, it's we're the way to think about it is that we're resisting, and we are building new spaces for our magical children, you know, so that they don't have to do it. So that's my initial response to what you're saying, because I really do feel you. I feel that need, just like, yeah, I don't want to be here right now. I don't want to be in this space. I want to go hide, and we don't have that option. You know, every now and then we can take a break, but really we got to get back out there because our babies need us.
So I want to come at it a little differently, because actually that's what I do every day. I'm on the inside, and in fact, I was very purposeful and intentional in it. I wanted to be an activist on the inside because I had as Gail knows, I have an extensive background in government. And so what I will say is that you got to remember that you will always be learning what your blind spots are. So you don't know everything, and you will never know anything or everything. And so you got to know that. You got to know that you're always on the growth edge of that issue, which means that you got to have a kitchen cabinet around you. Just as Janine. All of a sudden, I wanted to combine their names together. I was like, oh. I was like, Earlise? It's a beautiful name, right? It's a whole beautiful new name. So my apologies, girl. So as Janine was saying, so you've got to have that kitchen cabinet around you. And then you also have to, where I would pivot just a little bit is that sometimes you do need to stand on the sidelines, because this is where sustainability and resilience come in. When I came into the work at MG&E, there was a lot of work. But I also knew that if I was going to leave, that I had to leave something behind. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I really worked on, and this is really important for racial, ethnic, and linguistic identities in particular, is that you have to work with your allies to make sure that you're not the only one talking about why change needs to happen. Because if you're the only one doing it, then you're the only one doing it. And when you leave, then there's nobody doing it. So you've got to be bringing, going arm in arm with other people that are not like you. And you need to go along with other people that are not like you, because just as much as you want to talk about whatever your identity is, you've got to talk about the other isms and identities as well. And you've got to get schooled on it too, because this is our community, it's our society. And so we all have to be on the growth edge in terms of understanding what we don't know. And we all have to be on the growth edge of making the change. And so we need to get out of the box of our one-ism, whether we're put there or not. We have to understand that there's so much more. And so, you know, cultivating that and making sure that other people understand it just as deeply as you do, and you understand theirs just as much as you do, as they do. And then also you do need to fill your cup up. If you do not put the mask on yourself, you literally will die. And then what will have been the purpose? So you got to make sure that you put the mask on yourself and you do self-healing and self-renewal, and make sure that when you get up the next day, you're able to do it.
We thank you both. We have 2 short questions, right? And then we have a little something for you at the very end. And we want to be invited back again next year, so, you know.
Part 2.
So we want to do the right thing. So I know we had 2 short questions, so if you're here, please.
I think, no, just one.
Just one, okay, all right.
Am I? Mine is, I don't think, maybe, it's a question to all of us to ask every day in the spirit of maritime stewardship, me, myself, and I in the mirror. And so that is a question, not just but for all of us, because oftentimes noncompliance and resistance actually is a healthy response, because the help that's being suggested and provided is not helpful from the vantage point of the folks we're seeking to be of assistance to. And so my invitation is for all of us to be checking in and doing the work. Yes, we need to provide working with what we have available, and also be transforming the systems and the ways in which we've learned to be of service, because they ain't helpful from the vantage point of the people being helped. And so the collaboration resistance piece is not just how we relate to each other or how others relate, but inside ourselves. Have we, as the professionals operating in these fields, do we have what we need to discern and speak into the listening and the need of the folks that we're seeking to serve, even if we share the same intersectional identities? We've been schooled in ways that take us out of responsiveness to what is being called for. So my plea to all of us is to examine the judgment criteria that we use that operationalize what is illness and what ain't, what is health and what ain't, because often acting on that generates the resistance and the noncompliance, and it is a healthy response even though it doesn't appear to be.
Thank you, Dr. Simonet.